For as far as the eye can see, you have all these trucks pretty much on this side carrying goods into Poland, and on this side, just for hours, people have been waiting to get across the border here at the Ukrainian-Polish border. And just absolutely heartbreaking stories. You know, the line is just filled with, obviously, with women and children. Just take a look at this. And this is so much better than it was a couple of days ago. And I can just tell you just the stories of, you know, children having to say goodbye to their moms, to their dads rather. Wives having to say bye to their husbands because they know that they have to stay back and fight and to protect their nation. And then they walk pretty much all the way down this road, and on that side is Poland. And their future is uncertain. I mean, just imagine if you were living today in Maryland, in Washington, D.C., in Boise, Idaho, in Portland, Oregon, and suddenly you just had to like take whatever you can, the clothes on your back, a few documents, and as much as possible fill a suitcase, and then you have to walk. You have to wait for hours and then cross into another country where you don't know people, you don't have contacts, you don't have, and then you have to leave your husband behind. I mean, it's just, it's unbelievable. Today there are organizations like Orphans Promise, Operation Blessing, CBN, and so many others that are on the other side of the border right now. Orphans Promise, CBN, Operation Blessing, they're on the other side of the border, and they're going to be helping these women and children coming across, streaming across the Ukrainian border. Please take a moment to give, whether it's to these organizations or others that are doing incredible work here, just trying to bring comfort and meet the physical needs of the people today in Ukraine.
I'm joined today by Gary Lane. He's senior international correspondent at CBN News. How you doing, Gary?
I'm doing great, Billy. Glad to be with you.
Well, I wanted to talk with you because a number of reports out there about God intervening in amazing ways in the midst of this Ukrainian-Russian conflict, this brutal invasion by Russia into Ukraine. We're obviously seeing lots of headlines about that battle, but amid those headlines, there have been these amazing stories, these claims of God intervening. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I've got to tell you, Billy, I haven't been able to verify this, but I think it's amazing. There are a lot of Christians in Ukraine talking about this. But last week I talked to our CBN Ukraine director, and I said, look, tell me, are there any miracles going on? He said, yes, as a matter of fact, there are. There was a member of our church whose son went to the front lines, and he and his battle group were facing the Russians, and he called his dad on a cell phone. They still have cell phone service. And he said, Dad, you've got to get people in the church praying because I don't know if we're going to make it through this. We are fighting overwhelming odds here. The Russians are just so large, and they have all this mechanical equipment, tanks, and armored personnel carriers and anti-aircraft stuff, you name it, artillery. And he said, I don't know if we're going to make it. So the father got off the phone. He called members of his church, and they started a prayer chain, and they started praying nonstop for their men in the field and for this man's son. And the son called back later in the evening. He said, Dad, you wouldn't believe it. It was like a UFO or something. We've never seen anything like it. Just a brilliant flash of lightning in the sky, just taking over the whole sky. We haven't seen that. We thought maybe the Americans or somebody had a weapon they were using, but we haven't seen this. And then the next morning they woke up and they said all the equipment from the Russians was destroyed. I
Wow.
mean, that's amazing miracle, Billy. And I've got to say, it kind of reminded me a bit of the Bible. I think it's in Judges 7, Gideon and Gideon's army. Remember, the Lord had him whittle down the army to about 300 men. They were facing 135,000 Midianites. And Gideon said, how are we ever going to beat, these guys? Kind of like the Ukrainians with the
Yeah.
Russians.
Yeah.
And God intervened. They went to the camp of the enemy, of the Midianites, and the Midianites became confused and started fighting one another. And that leads me to this other story that he talked about, and that was there was a battalion of tanks coming through a Ukrainian village, and they took over the village. And afterwards, they saw Ukrainian flags at City Hall and around the village, and they took these flags and they planted them on their tanks. The spoils of war. We defeated the Ukrainians. This is a souvenir we can take home. And later that evening, they were on the way to meet up with another battle tank group. And when they did, that group thought they were Ukrainians, so they opened fire on them. So very much like Gideon's army, fighting one another.
Well, and I
God
know,
confusing them.
well, I was going to say in that story, I know there were some prayers going out, for the Russians to sort of fight one another, to turn on one another in some way. So it was interesting to hear that story. And as believers, right, as we look at all of this, whether we can verify the different reports or not, as Christians, taking a step back, when we read scripture and we see what is possible with God, when we look at a situation going on in real time, we should believe that any of these things are possible, right?
Well, we should, and I think it's encouraging to Christians, even if it's been embellished a little bit. It encourages us in our faith. But I've got to say, Billy, as a believer, I also feel bad for the Russians. I mean, I can't imagine Russians turning their tanks on one another and just slaughtering one another. I mean, it's bad enough fighting an enemy, but to do that to one another. And I feel for the family member. I've been to Russia a number of times. I feel for the family members, the parents, the grandparents, the children, the moms, the dads, right?
Yeah.
Spouses.
Absolutely. And you bring up a really important point too, that in these issues, it's very easy to only talk about prayer for one side, right? You want to pray for everybody involved. There are Russian citizens here. There are people in the military. There are lots of people who are not happy that this is going on. And even those who are happy that it's going on or leading it, we need to be praying for everyone, for changed hearts, right? For changed minds.
Well, definitely, because it's a tragedy for all sides. And I mean, I think of Russians too. The average Russian, the sanctions are going to hurt them. It's not going to hurt the oligarchs. It's not going to hurt Putin. These men have tremendous wealth. The sanctions are not going to hurt them. It's going to hurt the average Russian. I know we have to do it, but it hurts them. And when they bury soldiers, it doesn't matter which side you're on. It's tragic for all involved.
Just as we round out to the end here, one of the other elements of this, we're rounding into almost a 2-week period now that this has been going on. And you look at the situation, you have the Russians with almost 1 million military members. You have just under 200,000 registered members of the military in Ukraine, kind of looking at it from that perspective, of course, not counting all the people stepping up to fight, but it's clearly a David and Goliath type situation. What has it been like for you, even from the perspective of prayer, to sort of watch the Ukrainians be able to hold this massive force back?
Well, I think it's amazing because really, it wasn't just Putin. I think a lot of political observers and military analysts, and journalists, we kind of thought that Russia would march in there and that would be the end of it. They'd occupy and take over Ukraine in a matter of days. And already we're looking at 2 weeks. It's got to be, there's got to be something more involved. And I believe it's divine intervention protecting the people of Ukraine at this time. There are many believers there praying, believers around the world praying. God hears those prayers, but we need to keep it up. I think the key is we don't pray for Russia or Ukraine to win. We pray for peace and for the fighting to end and for there to be a peaceful resolution to this and for God to pour his spirit out upon all of Ukraine. And when this is over with, may many, many, many souls come to Christ as a result.
Gary, thank you so much for taking the time to break this story down for us.
Glad to be with you, Billy. Thank you.
Our senior international correspondent, George Thomas, is with us now from Lviv, Ukraine. So, George, there is some controversy surrounding the details of this so-called humanitarian corridor. What's going on there?
Yeah, President Zelensky of Ukraine basically called Russia's attempt of getting people out of these danger spots like Mariupol, Kharkiv, the Kherson region as immoral. And here's why, because the Russians say that these Ukrainians can escape to Russia and Belarus. So in essence, this corridor is not to other Ukrainian cities, but instead the corridor goes all the way north to Belarus, or all the way east to Russia, or all the way south to Crimea. The Ukrainians say that's absolutely ridiculous.
Now, you had the chance to travel outside of Lviv this past weekend. What's the mood in the outlying towns?
Yeah, just to echo the reporting that my colleague Dale Hurd just put there in the piece, this idea of urban warfare. In fact, as of early December, the Pentagon had already been shipping in the various kinds of weapons that would allow the Ukrainians to engage in urban warfare. As I said, I went outside of Lviv this weekend, and you drive down the main arteries of the city, and you see these side streets going into these small villages, and every one of them, Ephraim, is they've put up sandbags, they've put up concrete walls, and you've got civilians who are manning these posts. That what I saw, they were armed with AK-47s and other weapons. You get the sense that this is going to turn into an urban warfare. And right now, the Russians are using missiles and their fighter planes. But when it comes to controlling the country, you have to be in the streets, the cities, the streets like this one. And the Ukrainians are preparing for the potential of urban warfare.
George, this weekend, people at the Armenian church in Lviv took down a statue of Jesus. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, in fact, this was the first time ever that the statue of Jesus came down at the Armenian church since World War II. And in fact, let me just show you, it's something that we're seeing all around this historic city. Right here is a major statue. It's one of four in the heart of this cultural center. And in fact, this particular statue dates back to the early 1800s. So what authorities have been doing these last few days is basically taping up these historic statues as a way to preserve them, because the reality is that, in fact, we just walked a few minutes ago from another very, very old church. They've been putting up this mesh and this metal protective on the stained glasses to make sure that they protect these very important cultural as well as religious sites here in Lviv.
All right, thank you, George, preserving their history there. Thank you so much, reporting for us from Lviv, Ukraine.
It's the biggest ground war in Europe since World War II. Russia continues to pummel Ukraine and is expected to face strong resistance as Putin's war effort continues. So, how are the Ukrainians holding up? Who are they looking to far beyond the Western powers for help? Well, here with us from Ukraine is CBN Ukraine Director Konstantin Livtyenenko. Kostya, I know you're probably under a lot of duress, facing a lot of hardship, but please share with us the latest. How are Ukrainians holding up under this Russian onslaught?
Oh, hi, Gary. Oh, thank you for this opportunity to share. Ukrainians are surprising one another with unity, with such a level of readiness to help, to unite and stand and push back the enemy. You know, as previously our President Vladimir Zelensky, that is just, you know, he's our real Iron Man. You know, he's sitting downtown Kiev, you know, and not stepping back and he keeps coordinating war and resistance in our country. So, and as he said before, when he became a president, he said, every one of you is the president. And today he says, every one of you is a soldier, because, like, you know, not everyone can hold a machine gun. And honestly, in many cities, people want to join the militia, the territorial defense, but authorities and army, they saying, we have enough people. You go find yourself another job, another way to help your country. And so we have more than army needs now.
Well, what are the greatest needs at this time?
Well, the greatest needs of this time is of course, the continuation of the prayers and participate the informational war. And of course, and everywhere we need food, we need basic needs.
How have you seen God intervene on behalf of the Ukrainian people? What do you know? What can you share?
Well, I can share that one brother shared an audio from a brother from the church. So he says that his son, he's a part of the military, and he was saying that they were like in the dark night, they were holding their positions, and they've discovered that a lot of Russian Federation tanks and machines coming at them, and they might struggle defending themselves. And he picks up his phone and he calls his father. He says, "Dad, you have to pray right now. we in a situation. So his father, he rings to other members of the church. They start praying, and then later son gives a phone call and he says, "There's some miracle happened. It looked like some spaceship, like there was like an attack from the spaceship. There was some kind of a lightnings was starting shooting from the sky, and like sparks were like spreading everywhere. And then on the morning they discovered that the whole machinery was destroyed. So they, like, all of those soldiers, they thought maybe it was done by some kind of a weapon that we didn't know about, or it was just God's intervention."
Wow.
So, and there was another occasion that we just got from our friend that we know in person. We were praying that they would start resisting each other, that enemy would resist the enemy, because we know there was several biblical occasions like this, that when God was doing this. And another part of the Russian army, they occupied one little town, and they've removed flags from the town's government buildings. They attached those flags to their tanks, and they started to ride. And eventually, at the dark in the evening, they met the first group of the tanks, and so they thought they are enemies to each other, and they started shooting into each other.
Finally, then, I just want to know, how should we pray for you, your family, other CBN workers there, and the people of Ukraine? What should we pray?
Well, please pray that we could hear God in this time. That we would be able to have the most deficit thing in the world, like in our country now. It's the peace in our hearts. That our God, who is the Prince of Peace, would grant the peace in our hearts, and that in this condition of the peace, we could just see the ways how we can build the kingdom in the times of war, that we could be the light and the warmth and the love and the hand of God to other people who in need. Because some of us stay in Kiev, some of us stay right outside of Kiev, some of us took our families across the border, and men stayed there, and like we all want to be the hands of God. So pray that we would be active members of body of Christ in this time, that we would not just sit and be afraid and full of fear for our lives, that we would be productive in building the kingdom.
Well, we're also praying for the protection of you, your family, our CBN family, all of Ukraine, peace there, and that God's Spirit will be poured out on Ukraine. So, Ukraine Director for CBN, Konstantin Litvinenko, thank you for taking the time to be with us. May God be with you.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. God bless.
Слухайте, тут такий реквест від Джорджа пішов. Він питається, чи знаєте, чи може знаєте якусь людину, яка...
My name is George.
Його звати Джордж.
And I'm from America.
Він з Америки.
And in America today, hundreds of people are sending prayers for Ukraine.
І в Америці сьогодні більше сотні людей, тобто багато людей, надсилають молитви за Україну.
They are praying for your country and for your military.
Вони моляться за нашу країну і за наші війська.
So I want to share one of those prayers.
І я хочу з вами поділитися одною з цих молитв.
One of the prayers from an American.
Одна молитва з одного американця.
He's praying that God will protect your land.
Він молиться за те, щоб Бог захистив нашу землю.
Will give your military strength.
Дав нашій армії сили.
Will give your political leaders wisdom.
Дав нашій політиці мудрості.
And protect your nation.
І щоб захистив нашу націю.
God bless you, brother. Slava Boga. Jesus, I pray a hedge of protection around your people. Keep them in the palm of your hand. Lord, I pray that you would soften the heart of President Putin to withdraw his forces from his nation. Strengthen President Zelensky and give him wisdom and guidance to lead his Ukraine. Give peace into your Ukrainian pastors and leaders and civic leaders. I speak peace into this region. I pray this in the mighty name of God. Thank you. Amen. The world is praying for you guys. Okay? Yeah, just know that. Okay?
After 11 months of negotiations, Israel's chief takeaway is alarm.
We look to Vienna and we're deeply troubled by what we see. For Israel and all the stability-seeking forces in the Middle East, the emerging deal, as it seems, is highly likely to create a more violent, more volatile Middle East.
They said that they were going to get a longer and stronger deal. This deal will be shorter and weaker.
Just days before an expected announcement, former State Department advisor on Iran, Gabriel Naronha, released information provided to him by current State Department officials.
My former colleagues I worked with, who were really so distressed by what they were seeing that they asked me to go public with these details because they said that Congress had not been informed and the American public hadn't been informed. And they were just so worried with the concessions that were being made by the negotiating teams that they felt that they needed to say something about it.
Naronha says the deal clears the way for a nuclear Iran.
Unfortunately, they're not getting any of the sunsets on Iran's nuclear restrictions lifted or extended. And so in only 9 years, Iran will have a clear path to a nuclear weapon. The American people need to know that this deal is illegal. It is dangerous to American national security. It's dangerous to the regional and global security in both the short term and in the long term.
Russia, a key player in these negotiations, wants written guarantees from the U.S. that sanctions from its war on Ukraine will not stop its trade with Iran. Israeli Prime Minister Bennett met with Putin on Saturday in Moscow about the war in Ukraine, although it's expected they discussed the nuclear deal and Russia's ongoing support for Iran. The deal would also reportedly provide billions in sanctions relief to Iran.
There are no restrictions in this deal on how that money will be spent and fueled to Iran's proxies. So we can expect that a lot is going to go to Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. And so we're going to really see over the next few years, it might take a few months to get going, we're going to see a rapid proliferation of terrorist activity. We're going to see more destabilizing activity, and we're going to see Iran's influence and power grow in the region.
That power represents an existential threat to Israel.
Let me be clear. Israel will not accept Iran as a nuclear threshold state. Israel will always maintain its freedom of action to defend itself.
Israel's pledge to defend itself, along with Iran's nuclear ambition, puts these two enemies on a collision course for war. Gordon?
Well, Chris, what elements of this deal are so troubling?
Well, not only what Gabriel Naronha said, but the deal reportedly also removes sanctions from some of the top Iranian officials, including President Ibrahim Raisi. Raisi is known as the Butcher of Tehran. He's responsible for the deaths of about 5,000 political prisoners in the late 1980s. Another top official, Gordon, is Iranian cleric Ahmed Jannati. He's responsible for rigging the Iranian elections. He's responsible for these massive death to America, death to Israel rallies, and he's pushing for the regime to kill protesters. And it also appears, Gordon, that Iran will be able to keep some of its enriched uranium and the advanced centrifuges that it's put online since 2018. So these are additional reasons why Israel is so concerned about these deals and why many in Congress are as well.
Well, tell us about the reaction. What's the reaction in Congress?
Well, one thing the Congress has done, Gordon, is that Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy and Congressman Michael McCaul, he's the leading minority member on the Armed Services Committee, they sent a letter to Secretary of State Blinken, and they urged them to submit the final nuclear deal with Iran to congressional review. And what they do is they cite the Iranian Nuclear Agreement Review Act of 2015. Now, what that act did is it required the president to submit any agreement within 5 days to the Congress. Now, McCarthy and McCaul and other senators and congressmen, they're alarmed that the administration may avoid this requirement by saying that the new agreement is just a continuation of the original 2015 agreement. And they say if the administration bypasses Congress, it'll be a violation of U.S. law. And also some senators like Jim Inhofe, Bill Hagerty from Tennessee, they're saying they'll do whatever they can to stop what they say is a very bad deal. And finally, we interviewed Senator Lindsey Graham here in Jerusalem just a few weeks ago, where he warned that Iran, it wants to destroy Israel, and it must not be allowed to get a nuclear weapon.
Well, we're hearing out of both Russia and China on this deal. What role did they play?
Well, a pretty big role, according to Mikhail Orlanov. He's Russia's top negotiator. And just a few days ago, he was talking to reporters, and he bragged that China and Russia, they relied on each other during the negotiations. And he says that their joint efforts succeeded. He also said that the Iranian negotiators, they acted like lions, and that Iran got actually more than they expected. Now, some look and some put the blame on the U.S. chief negotiator. His name is Rob Malley, for those concessions. Now, Malley's on record as saying that it's a mistake to see Hezbollah and Hamas simply as terrorists, but they're social political movements. So it's his view of these groups and Iran that's making these concessions to Iran, and why in our report, Nahorna and these congressmen and senators, and why some of these negotiators resigned in protest, and why some others are leaking this information to make it public.
Well, I'm sorry, that's just idiotic. That's right up there with members of the Obama administration saying the Muslim Brotherhood was some kind of social organization. It just makes no sense. Is anybody paying attention to what's happening in Ukraine, that the West is absolutely limited in what it can do to help the Ukrainian war effort, and it's because Russia has nuclear weapons, and Putin's put that on the table? If Iran gets nuclear weapons, that is unbelievably destabilizing for the whole Middle East. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Is anybody looking at the military aspect of this?
Banning all imports of Russian oil and gas and energy. That means Russian oil will no longer be acceptable at U.S. ports, and the American people will deal another powerful blow to Putin's war machine. This is a move that has strong bipartisan support in Congress and, I believe, in the country. Americans have rallied to support the Ukrainian people and made it clear we will not be part of subsidizing Putin's war. We made this decision in close consultation with our allies and our partners around the world, particularly in Europe, because a united response to Putin's aggression has been my overriding focus, to keep all NATO and all of the EU and our allies totally united. We're moving forward with this ban, understanding that many of our European allies and partners may not be in a position to join us. The United States produces far more oil domestically than all the European countries combined. In fact, we're a net exporter of energy. So we can take this step when others cannot. But we're working closely with Europe and our partners to develop a long-term strategy to reduce their dependence on Russian energy as well. Our teams are actively discussing how to make this happen, and today we remain united. We remain united in our purpose to keep pressure mounting on Putin and his war machine. This is a step that we're taking to inflict further pain on Putin, but there will be cost as well here in the United States. I said I would level with the American people from the beginning. And when I first spoke to this, I said defending freedom is going to cost. It's going to cost us as well in the United States. Republicans and Democrats understand that. Republicans and Democrats alike have been clear that we must do this. Over the last week, I've spoken with President Zelensky several times to hear from him about the situation on the ground and to consult and continue to consult with our European allies and about U.S. support for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Thus far, we've provided more than $1 billion in security assistance to Ukraine. Shipments of defensive weapons are arriving in Ukraine every day from the United States, and we, the United States, are the ones coordinating the delivery of our allies and partners of similar weapons, from Germany to Finland to the Netherlands. We're working that out. We're also providing humanitarian support for the Ukrainian people. both those still in Ukraine and those who have fled safely to a neighboring country. We're working with humanitarian organizations to surge tens of thousands of tons of food, water, and medical supplies into Ukraine, and with more on the way. Over the weekend, I sent Secretary Blinken to visit our border between Poland and Ukraine and to Moldova to see what the situation was firsthand and report back. General Milley, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of our Defense Department, was also in Europe, meeting with his counterparts and allies on NATO's eastern flank to reassure them, those countries bordering Russia, NATO countries, that we will keep our NATO commitment, a sacred commitment of Article 5. The Vice President Harris is going to be traveling to meet with our allies in Poland and Romania later this week as well. I've made it clear that the United States will share in the responsibility of caring for the refugees so the costs do not fall entirely on the European countries bordering Ukraine. And yesterday I spoke with my counterparts in France, Germany, and the United Kingdom about Russia's escalating violence against working with every tool at our disposal to protect American families and businesses. Now, let me say this. To the oil and gas companies and to the finance firms that back them, we understand Putin's war against the people of Ukraine is causing prices to rise. We get that. That's self-evident. But, it's no excuse to exercise excessive price increases or padding profits or any kind of effort to exploit this situation or American consumers, exploit them. Russia's aggression is costing us all, and it's no time for profiteering or price gouging. I want to be clear about what we'll not tolerate, but I also want to acknowledge those firms and oil and gas industries that are pulling out of Russia and joining other businesses that are leading by example. This is a time when we have to do our part and make sure we're not taking advantage. Look, let me be clear about two other points. First, it's simply not true that my administration or policies are holding back domestic energy production. That's simply not true. Even amid the pandemic, companies in the United States pumped more oil during my first year in office than they did during my predecessor's first year. We're approaching a record levels of oil and gas production in the United States, and we're on track to set a record of oil production next year. In the United States, 90% of onshore oil production takes place on land that isn't owned by the federal government. And of the remaining 10% that occurs on federal land, the oil and gas industry has millions of acres leased. They have 9,000 permits to drill now. They could be drilling right now, yesterday, last week, last year. They have 9,000 to drill onshore that are already approved. So let me be clear. They are not using them for production now. That's their decision. These are the facts. We should be honest about the facts. Second, this crisis is a stark reminder to protect our economy over the long term, we need to become energy independent. I've had numerous conversations over the last 3 months with our European friends of how they have to wean themselves off of Russian oil. It's just not tenable. It should motivate us to accelerate the transition to clean energy. This is a perspective that our European allies share, and the future where together we can achieve greater independence. Loosening environmental regulations or pulling back clean energy investment won't, let me expand, will not lower energy prices for families. But transforming our economy to run on electric vehicles powered by clean energy with tax credits to help American families winterize their homes and use less energy, that will help. And if we do what we can, it will mean that no one has to worry about the price of the gas pump in the future. That'll mean tyrants like Putin won't be able to use fossil fuels as weapons against other nations. And it will make America a world leader, manufacturing and exporting clean energy technologies of the future to countries all around the world. This is the goal we should be racing toward. Over the last 2 weeks, the Ukrainian people have inspired the world, and I mean that in a literal sense. They've inspired the world with their bravery, their patriotism, their defiant determination to live free. Putin's war has caused enormous suffering and needless loss of life of women, children, everyone in Ukraine. both Ukraine and, I might add, Russians. Ukrainian leaders, as well as leaders around the world, have repeatedly called for a ceasefire, for humanitarian relief, for real diplomacy. But Putin seems determined to continue on his murderous path, no matter the cost. Putin's now targeting cities and has been targeting cities and civilians, schools, hospitals, apartment buildings. Last week, he attacked the largest nuclear power plant in Europe with an apparent disregard for the potential of triggering a nuclear meltdown. He has already turned 2 million Ukrainians into refugees. Russia may continue to grind out its advance at a horrible price, but this much is already clear. Ukraine will never be a victory for Putin. Putin may be able to take a city, but he'll never be able to hold the country. And if we do not respond to Putin's assault on global peace and stability today, the cost of freedom and to the American people will be even greater tomorrow. So we're going to continue to support the brave Ukrainian people as they fight for their country. And I call on Congress to pass the $12 billion Ukraine assistance package that I have asked them for of late. Ukrainian people are demonstrating by their physical courage that they are not about to just let Putin take what he wants. That's clear. They'll defend their freedom, their democracy, their lives. And we're going to keep providing security assistance, economic assistance, and humanitarian assistance. We're going to support them against tyranny, oppression, violent acts of subjugation. People everywhere, and I think it's maybe even surprised some of you all, people everywhere are speaking up for freedom. And when the history of this war is written, Putin's war on Ukraine will have left Russia weaker and the rest of the world stronger. May God bless all those heroes in Ukraine. And now I'm off to Texas. Thank you very, very much. I know there's a lot of questions. I know there's a lot of questions, but there's a lot more that has to be made clear, and I'm going to hold on that until we get more information. Thank you. Appreciate it.